I'm Sarah, and I'm 32 years old. For most of my life, I thought I understood my place in my family. I was the responsible one, the one who helped out, the one who could be counted on. My sister Emma was the free spirit, the one who got to chase her dreams while I held down the fort. I accepted this dynamic because I believed that loyalty and dedication would eventually be recognized and rewarded. I believed my father when he promised me his 1967 Mustang convertible, the car he'd been restoring since before I was born, the car he said would be mine when I turned 30. But 6 months ago, I watched my sister drive away in that car, and I realized that wasn't the only promise my family had broken. What I discovered next shattered everything I thought I knew about the people I'd spent my whole life trying to please. The Mustang wasn't just any car. It was my father's pride and joy, a cherry red convertible with white racing stripes that he'd bought as a rusted shell when my mother was pregnant with me. He spent every weekend in the garage, carefully rebuilding every component, teaching me about engines and transmissions and the satisfaction of bringing something beautiful back to life. I was maybe 7 years old when I first sat behind the wheel, pretending to drive while he adjusted the carburetor. That's when he first said it would be mine someday. Throughout my childhood, the car became our connection point. While Emma was inside practicing piano or painting, I was in the garage handing Dad tools and learning about timing belts and brake pads. He'd tell me stories about the car's history, about the previous owner who'd bought it new and driven it across the country, about the day he'd found it abandoned behind a gas station in Nevada. The car represented possibility, adventure, the idea that something broken could be made whole again with enough patience and love. When I turned 16, Dad let me help with the final restoration phases. We spent the summer of 2007 together, sanding down the body, applying primer, and carefully painting those perfect white stripes. I remember the day we fired up the engine for the first time after the rebuild. The sound was incredible, this deep rumble that seemed to vibrate through my chest. Dad had tears in his eyes as he told me how proud he was of the work we'd done together, how the car would be my reward for all the help I'd given him over the years. My sister Emma never showed much interest in the Mustang. She was more focused on her art classes and her social life. She'd occasionally make comments about how loud the car was or how impractical it seemed, but I never thought much of it. The car was clearly mine in every way that mattered. I knew every bolt, every wire, every component. I'd helped build it from the ground up. But there were signs I should have recognized earlier, patterns of behavior that I dismissed because I wanted to believe my family loved me equally. Emma was always the one who got the benefit of the doubt when things went wrong. If we both broke something, somehow it was always my fault for not watching out for my younger sister. If there was only enough money for one of us to participate in an activity, Emma's interests always took priority because she was the creative one, the one with special talents that needed nurturing. When I graduated high school with a 3.8 GPA and got accepted to State University with a partial scholarship, my parents' reaction was proud but measured. They expected me to succeed academically because I was the responsible one. When Emma got accepted to art school with mediocre grades but a strong portfolio, they threw her a celebration party and immediately started talking about how to finance her education. The difference in their reactions should have told me everything I needed to know about how they viewed our respective achievements. I worked 2 jobs through college to minimize my student loan debt, coming home exhausted from classes and work to help with household maintenance and family obligations. Emma's college experience was funded entirely by my parents, and she spent her summers doing unpaid internships at galleries and art studios while I worked at a local automotive shop to save money. I told myself this was fair because Emma was pursuing her passion while I was studying business, something practical and stable. I convinced myself that my parents' investment in Emma's dreams was temporary, that eventually they'd recognize my contributions and sacrifices. The first real crack in this narrative came when my grandmother died 3 years ago. Grandma Rose had always been special to me, the one family member who seemed to see and appreciate who I really was, rather than just the role I played. She'd taught me to bake her famous apple pie recipe, shared stories about her own struggles with family expectations, and always made me feel valued for my mind and my heart, rather than just my usefulness. After the funeral, I learned that Grandma Rose had left me her engagement ring in her will, along with a letter explaining that she wanted me to have something beautiful that was mine alone. The ring was a simple but elegant vintage piece, nothing incredibly valuable but meaningful because it represented her recognition of my worth. I treasured that ring and wore it every day as a reminder that at least one person in my family had seen me clearly. But when I went to collect the ring from my parents' house, my mother told me there had been a mistake. She claimed Grandma Rose had actually intended the ring to go to Emma because Emma was getting married soon and would need it for the engagement. I pointed out that the will clearly stated my name and that Emma wasn't even engaged yet, but my mother insisted that Grandma Rose had been confused in her final months and that the ring should go to whoever would use it first. I was devastated, but I didn't fight it. I told myself that family harmony was more important than a piece of jewelry, that Emma would probably appreciate the ring more than I would anyway. When Emma got engaged 6 months later, she didn't even use Grandma Rose's ring. Her fiancé had already bought her a different engagement ring, something modern and expensive that better matched her aesthetic. The vintage ring sat in a jewelry box in Emma's bedroom, unworn and forgotten. This pattern continued over the next few years. Emma's wedding was a lavish affair that cost my parents nearly $40,000. When I mentioned that I'd like to have a nice wedding someday too, my mother suggested that I was more practical and would probably prefer a small ceremony anyway. Emma's student loans were quietly paid off by my parents as a wedding gift. My student loans remained my responsibility because I was the one who'd chosen to study business, something that would eventually pay well enough to handle my own debts. I kept telling myself that this was temporary, that my parents were just helping Emma get established in her adult life, that my turn for recognition and support would come eventually. I believed this because I needed to believe it, because accepting the truth about my family's priorities was too painful to consider. Meanwhile, I was building a successful career in automotive marketing, working my way up from an entry-level position to becoming a regional manager for a company that specialized in classic car restoration parts. I was good at my job, respected by my colleagues, and financially stable. I bought my own house, paid off my student loans ahead of schedule, and started saving for my future. But none of these achievements seemed to register with my family as particularly noteworthy. Success was expected from me, not celebrated. The Mustang sat in my parents' garage all these years, occasionally driven on weekends, but mostly serving as my father's pride and joy. He'd still talk about it being mine eventually, usually when I was helping him with some project around the house, or when he needed someone to understand his passion for automotive restoration. I never doubted that promise because it was tied to so many memories and conversations between us. Last year, Emma went through a divorce. It was messy and expensive, and she moved back in with my parents while she figured out her next steps. I was supportive, of course, helping her move, listening to her process her emotions, and providing practical advice about rebuilding her life. I even helped her find a job at a local art gallery, using my professional network to connect her with the right people. During this time, Emma started showing interest in the Mustang for the first time in her life. She'd make comments about how beautiful it was, how much she'd love to learn to drive a manual transmission, how the car would be perfect for her new single lifestyle. I thought it was just appreciation, maybe even a way for her to connect with Dad during a difficult period in her life. Then, 3 weeks before my 32nd birthday, my father called me on a Thursday evening. He sounded uncomfortable, clearing his throat several times before telling me he needed to discuss something important. He explained that Emma was having a really hard time adjusting to her new life, that she needed something to boost her confidence and help her feel independent again. He said he'd decided to give her the Mustang because she needed it more than I did. I was speechless. For several seconds, I couldn't form words. When I finally managed to speak, I reminded him of his promise, of all the years I'd spent helping him work on the car, of the understanding we'd had since I was a child. He told me I was being selfish, that Emma was going through a difficult time and needed family support. He said I already had a car, that I was successful and stable, that I should be happy to help my sister when she was struggling. I tried to explain that this wasn't about transportation, that the car represented our relationship and his recognition of my contributions to the family. He got defensive, saying I was making too big a deal out of material possessions, that a loving sister should want to help her sibling during a crisis. He made me feel guilty for even questioning his decision, for not immediately agreeing that Emma's needs should come first. But something felt wrong about the whole situation, something beyond just the broken promise. My father's explanations were inconsistent, and his discomfort seemed to stem from something more than just changing his mind about the car. I started paying closer attention to my family's dynamics, and what I discovered was deeply disturbing. Emma hadn't just asked for the car. She'd lobbied for it systematically, presenting arguments about why she deserved it more than I did. She'd told my parents that I was too practical to appreciate a classic car properly, that I'd probably just sell it eventually anyway. She'd suggested that since she was the one going through a difficult time, she should get priority consideration for family resources. She'd even researched the car's current value and presented it as evidence that she should receive an equivalent gift to what my parents had spent on her wedding. But the most devastating discovery came when I was helping my mother organize some old paperwork. I found a folder containing insurance documents and registration information for the Mustang, and tucked inside was a handwritten note from my father to himself, dated over 2 years earlier. The note outlined his plan to give the car to Emma when she turned 30, regardless of what he'd promised me. He'd written about how Emma would appreciate the car's beauty more than I would, how she deserved something special after all the challenges she'd faced in her marriage. The note revealed that my father had been planning to break his promise to me for years, that every conversation we'd had about the car being mine someday had been a lie. He'd never intended to honor his commitment to me. He'd simply been telling me what I wanted to hear while privately planning to give the car to his preferred daughter. I confronted my parents with the note, expecting them to at least acknowledge the deception and apologize for the broken promise. Instead, they became defensive and accusatory. My mother insisted that I was being dramatic, that things change and families need to adapt to new circumstances. My father claimed that he'd forgotten about the old note, that his feelings about the car had evolved over time. They both suggested that I was being unreasonable for expecting them to honor a promise made to a child, that adult relationships require flexibility and understanding. They turned the situation around on me, questioning why I couldn't just be happy for Emma, why I had to make everything about myself, why I couldn't show more maturity and family loyalty. They made me feel like the villain for discovering their deception and asking for honesty about their intentions. The gaslighting was systematic and brutal. They rewrote the history of the promise, suggesting that I'd misunderstood or exaggerated what had been said. They minimized the significance of the years I'd spent working on the car, claiming that I'd helped because I enjoyed it, not because of any agreement about ownership. They made my legitimate hurt and anger seem petty and selfish. But I wasn't the only one they'd lied to. As I started asking more questions and paying closer attention to family financial matters, I discovered a pattern of deception that went far beyond the car. My parents had been systematically favoring Emma for years, while hiding the extent of their preferential treatment from me. The money they'd supposedly spent on Emma's wedding had actually been much more than $40,000. They'd paid for her honeymoon, her husband's student loans, and a down payment on their first house. The total amount was closer to $120,000, money that had come from refinancing my parents' house and dipping into their retirement savings. Meanwhile, when I'd asked for help with a down payment on my house, they'd told me they couldn't afford to help because they were worried about their retirement security. They'd encouraged me to get a conventional mortgage and praised my independence when I managed to buy my house on my own. I'd felt proud of my self-sufficiency, not realizing that my parents had simply chosen not to offer me the same support they'd freely given Emma. The pattern extended to smaller things too. Emma's art supplies, her computer equipment, her travel expenses for art shows and exhibitions had all been funded by my parents over the years. When I'd needed a new laptop for work, I'd bought it myself because I didn't want to burden my parents with additional expenses. I'd thought I was being considerate, but really I'd been excluded from a level of family support that Emma took for granted. Even the story about Grandma Rose's ring wasn't true. I found correspondence between my mother and the estate lawyer that revealed my grandmother had been very specific about wanting me to have the ring. The lawyer had questioned my mother about the decision to give it to Emma instead, but my mother had insisted that she knew what was best for the family. My grandmother's final wishes had been deliberately ignored to maintain the pattern of favoritism. The worst part was discovering that Emma knew about most of this deception. She'd been complicit in the lies, actively participating in the manipulation, while maintaining a facade of sisterly affection. She'd known about the car decision for months before my father called me, had helped plan the timing and the approach, had even suggested some of the arguments he'd used to justify the broken promise. I realized that I'd been living in a carefully constructed false reality, where my family's love was conditional on my usefulness and my willingness to accept less than my sister. Every sacrifice I'd made, every time I'd put family harmony above my own needs, had been interpreted as evidence that I didn't require the same level of consideration and support as Emma. The revelation was devastating, but it was also liberating. For the first time in my life, I could see my family clearly, without the filter of wishful thinking and desperate hope. I understood that their love for me was fundamentally different from their love for Emma, that I would always be the responsible one who could be counted on to sacrifice for the greater good, while Emma would always be the special one who deserved protection and prioritization. I decided to stop participating in this dynamic. I called my parents and told them that I wouldn't be attending Emma's birthday party, that I needed space to process what I'd learned about their financial decisions and their approach to family relationships. I explained that I couldn't pretend everything was normal when I'd discovered such a systematic pattern of deception and favoritism. They tried to minimize my concerns, suggesting that I was overreacting to normal family financial management. They insisted that they'd always loved me equally, that they'd simply made different decisions based on different circumstances. They couldn't or wouldn't acknowledge that those different circumstances had consistently favored Emma at my expense. I started seeing a therapist who specialized in family dynamics and emotional abuse. She helped me understand that what I'd experienced was a form of systematic family scapegoating, where one child is designated as the responsible one who can handle disappointment and sacrifice, while another child is protected from consequences and given preferential treatment. She explained that this dynamic often continues into adulthood, with the scapegoated child continuing to accept less, while the favored child continues to receive more. The therapy gave me language for what I'd experienced, and permission to set boundaries that protected my emotional well-being. I learned that family love shouldn't be conditional on acceptance of unfair treatment, that healthy relationships require honesty and reciprocity, that I had the right to expect the same consideration my sister received. I decided to attend Emma's birthday party after all, but with a different purpose. Instead of pretending everything was fine, I planned to address the situation directly and publicly. I'd spent my whole life protecting my family's reputation and maintaining harmony at my own expense, but I realized that this protection had enabled their harmful behavior. At the party, surrounded by extended family and family friends, I stood up during the toasts and shared what I'd discovered about the financial favoritism and the broken promises. I wasn't cruel or vindictive, but I was honest about the pattern of deception and the impact it had on my relationship with my parents and my sister. The reaction was immediate and intense. Several family members confirmed that they'd noticed the differential treatment over the years, but hadn't felt comfortable saying anything. My aunt admitted that she'd questioned my parents about their financial support for Emma, while seemingly expecting me to be completely self-sufficient. My uncle mentioned that he'd wondered why I hadn't received help with my education when Emma's schooling had been fully funded. My parents were shocked that I'd chosen to make our private family business public, but they couldn't deny the facts I'd presented. Emma tried to defend the situation by saying that she'd needed more help because she'd faced more challenges, but several family members pointed out that I'd also faced challenges and had simply been expected to handle them alone. For the first time in my life, my experience was validated by witnesses who'd seen the family dynamic from the outside. People who'd known me since childhood acknowledged that I'd always been treated as the responsible one who didn't need the same level of support and attention as Emma. The truth was finally visible to everyone, not just to me. But the real vindication came a few weeks later when I received a call from the CEO of a major automotive restoration company. He'd heard about my work through industry connections and wanted to offer me a position as their director of marketing and business development. The salary was nearly double what I was making, and the position came with equity in the company and the opportunity to work with some of the most prestigious classic car collections in the country. I accepted the offer immediately. Within a month, I was featured in 3 industry publications for my innovative approach to marketing classic car restoration services. The articles mentioned my personal passion for automotive restoration and my years of hands-on experience working on classic cars. One article specifically highlighted my work on a 1967 Mustang as an example of my deep understanding of the restoration process. My professional success was deeply satisfying, but it also served as evidence of what my family had failed to recognize. I wasn't just the responsible one who could handle disappointment. I was talented, creative, and capable of achieving recognition in my field. I'd built a successful career despite, not because of, my family's lack of support. The irony was profound. My father had given Emma the Mustang because he thought she'd appreciate its beauty more than I would, but I was now working with some of the most beautiful classic cars in the world. He'd assumed that I was too practical to value something artistic and emotional, but my new job required me to understand and communicate the emotional appeal of automotive artistry every day. My success also shifted the family dynamic in unexpected ways. Suddenly, my parents were interested in my career, proud of my achievements, and eager to share my accomplishments with their friends. They started calling me regularly, asking about my work and my life in ways they hadn't before. They seemed genuinely surprised by my professional recognition, as if they were seeing me clearly for the first time. But their new attention felt hollow because it was based on external validation rather than genuine appreciation for who I'd always been. They were proud of me now because other people recognized my value, not because they'd learned to see my worth independently. Their love still felt conditional, dependent on my ability to achieve success that reflected well on them. Emma's situation, meanwhile, became more complicated. The divorce settlement had been less favorable than she'd expected, and she was struggling financially despite the support she'd received from our parents. The Mustang, which she'd presented as essential for her emotional recovery, sat in her driveway most days because she'd discovered that classic car maintenance was expensive and time-consuming. She'd complained to our parents about the cost of insurance and the difficulty of finding reliable mechanics who understood vintage automotive systems. I learned about Emma's struggles through family conversations, and I felt a complex mix of sympathy and vindication. I was sorry that she was having difficulties, but I also couldn't help noticing that she was experiencing the same financial pressures and adult responsibilities that I'd been handling alone for years. The special treatment she'd received hadn't prepared her for the realities of independent adult life. My parents started hinting that they'd like me to offer Emma advice about career development and financial management. They suggested that I could mentor her through her transition period, sharing the practical knowledge I'd gained through my own experience with post-divorce rebuilding. They seemed to expect that I would naturally step into a supportive role, helping Emma navigate challenges that I'd never received help with myself. I declined these suggestions politely but firmly. I explained that I was focused on my new career responsibilities and didn't have the emotional energy to provide the kind of intensive support they were requesting. I pointed out that Emma was an adult who could seek professional guidance if she needed help with financial planning or career development. My parents seemed genuinely surprised by my refusal to help. They'd become so accustomed to my willingness to sacrifice my own needs for family harmony that they couldn't understand why I wasn't automatically volunteering to solve Emma's problems. They tried to guilt me into compliance, suggesting that successful people have an obligation to help family members who are struggling, but I'd learned to recognize manipulation tactics, and I'd developed the confidence to resist them. I explained that healthy family relationships require reciprocity, that support should be offered freely rather than expected as an obligation, and that I needed to prioritize my own well-being after years of prioritizing everyone else's needs. This marked a fundamental shift in my relationship with my family. For the first time in my life, I was setting boundaries based on my own needs rather than their expectations. I was no longer willing to accept less consideration than Emma received, no longer willing to sacrifice my own interests for the sake of family harmony, no longer willing to pretend that our family's love was equally distributed. The process wasn't easy. My parents went through several stages of response, from denial to anger to bargaining to eventual acceptance. They tried to convince me that I was misremembering or misinterpreting past events. They accused me of being selfish and ungrateful. They offered to make changes if I would just return to my previous role in the family system. But I'd learned that real change requires consistent action over time, not just promises and good intentions. I told them that I would consider rebuilding our relationship if they demonstrated genuine understanding of how their favoritism had affected me, and if they showed sustained commitment to treating me with the same consideration they showed Emma. I also established specific boundaries around financial discussions and family obligations. I wouldn't participate in conversations about Emma's problems or solutions to her difficulties. I wouldn't provide free advice or services that I would charge professional clients for. I wouldn't attend family events where I was expected to play the role of the understanding, supportive sister who didn't require the same level of care and attention as everyone else. These boundaries created some tension, but they also created space for more authentic relationships. My parents had to learn to interact with me as an independent adult with my own needs and priorities, rather than as a reliable source of support for the family system. Emma had to accept that I wasn't automatically available to help her through every difficulty. Gradually, my relationship with my parents began to improve, but on different terms. They started asking about my life because they were genuinely interested, not because they needed something from me. They began to acknowledge my achievements independently, not just when external recognition forced them to notice. They made efforts to understand my perspective on past events, even when it was uncomfortable for them to hear. Emma and I developed a more distant but honest relationship. We stopped pretending that we'd been equally treated or equally supported throughout our lives. She acknowledged that she'd received more financial help and more emotional protection than I had, though she struggled to understand why this was problematic. I acknowledged that she'd faced genuine difficulties in her marriage and divorce, though I maintained that those difficulties didn't justify the systematic favoritism she'd received. The most significant change was in my own sense of self-worth. I stopped measuring my value by my family's recognition and started building my identity around my own achievements and character. I learned to trust my perceptions of reality rather than accepting other people's interpretations of my experiences. I developed confidence in my ability to succeed independently without family support or approval. My new career flourished in ways I hadn't expected. Within a year, I was promoted to vice president and given responsibility for expanding the company's international operations. I traveled to classic car shows and auctions around the world, building relationships with collectors and restoration specialists who shared my passion for automotive history and craftsmanship. The work was incredibly fulfilling because it combined my technical knowledge with my marketing skills and my genuine love for classic cars. I wasn't just selling products or services. I was helping people preserve and restore pieces of automotive art and history. Every project felt meaningful. Every successful restoration felt like a victory for preservation and craftsmanship. I also began writing articles for classic car magazines, sharing technical knowledge and restoration tips with enthusiasts around the world. My articles were well received, and I started getting invitations to speak at automotive events and restoration conferences. I was becoming a recognized expert in a field I'd loved since childhood, building a reputation based on knowledge and skill rather than family connections or inherited advantages. The financial rewards were substantial too. My salary had increased dramatically, and my equity in the company was growing in value as the business expanded. I was able to pay off my mortgage early, build a substantial savings account, and start investing in classic cars of my own. I wasn't just financially secure, I was financially independent in ways I'd never imagined possible. But the emotional rewards were even more significant. I was working with people who valued my expertise and respected my contributions. I was part of a community that appreciated craftsmanship, attention to detail, and dedication to quality. I was building relationships based on mutual interest and respect, rather than family obligation and guilt. My success didn't go unnoticed by my family. My parents started mentioning my achievements to their friends, proudly sharing articles I'd written and photos from automotive events I'd attended. They seemed genuinely amazed by my professional recognition, as if they were discovering talents they'd never known I possessed. But their pride came with a new set of expectations. They started suggesting that I could help Emma get connected in the art world through my professional network, that I could provide financial advice or investment opportunities, that I could use my success to benefit the whole family. They seemed to assume that my achievements were family assets that should be shared with everyone. I had to establish clear boundaries around these expectations. I explained that my professional relationships were based on mutual respect and shared interests, not family connections. I pointed out that my financial success was the result of years of hard work and sacrifice that I'd undertaken alone, without family support or encouragement. I made it clear that I wouldn't be subsidizing anyone else's lifestyle or solving anyone else's problems. This boundary setting was challenging because it required me to resist deeply ingrained patterns of family obligation and guilt. My parents tried to make me feel selfish for not sharing my success more generously, but I'd learned to recognize emotional manipulation and respond with factual clarity rather than emotional reactivity. I reminded them that I'd never received the kind of financial support they were now asking me to provide for Emma. I pointed out that my success hadn't been celebrated or supported by the family when I was building my career. I explained that healthy relationships require reciprocity and that I couldn't be expected to give more than I'd ever received. The most profound moment came when my father finally acknowledged what he'd done with the Mustang. He called me on a Saturday morning, nearly 2 years after giving the car to Emma, and admitted that he'd made a mistake. He said he'd been wrong to break his promise to me, wrong to lie about his intentions, wrong to prioritize Emma's immediate needs over my years of dedication and support. He explained that Emma had been struggling with the car's maintenance requirements and had asked him to help her sell it. She'd discovered that owning a classic car required more time, money, and mechanical knowledge than she'd anticipated. The car that had been essential for her emotional recovery had become a burden that she couldn't manage effectively. He asked if I would be interested in buying the car from Emma, paying her the current market value so she could have the cash she needed for her financial difficulties. He presented this as an opportunity for everyone to get what they needed. Emma would get financial help, I would get the car I'd always wanted, and the family could move past the conflict that had damaged our relationships. I was quiet for a long time considering his offer. Part of me wanted the car desperately, wanted to reclaim the symbol of my relationship with my father and the years we'd spent working together. But I also understood that buying the car wouldn't undo the betrayal or restore the trust that had been broken. It would just be another transaction in a family that had already proven that relationships were conditional and promises were negotiable. I told my father that I appreciated his acknowledgement of the mistake, but that I wasn't interested in buying the car. I explained that the Mustang had represented more than just transportation or even automotive passion. It had symbolized his recognition of my contributions to the family and his commitment to honoring promises made to me. Once that symbolism had been destroyed, the car itself had lost its meaning. I also pointed out that offering to sell me the car wasn't the same as honoring the original promise. I would be paying market value for something that had been promised to me as a gift, essentially purchasing what should have been freely given. This felt like another form of the differential treatment that had characterized my entire relationship with the family. My father seemed surprised by my response. He'd expected me to jump at the opportunity to get the car, even under these circumstances. He couldn't understand why I wouldn't want to resolve the situation in a way that gave everyone something they wanted. He seemed genuinely confused by my insistence that the process mattered as much as the outcome. I tried to explain that trust, once broken, couldn't be simply restored through corrective transactions. The car had been meaningful because it represented his love and respect for me, his recognition of my contributions, his commitment to keeping promises made to me. Buying the car would get me the vehicle, but it wouldn't restore the relationship significance that had made it special in the first place. This conversation marked another turning point in my relationship with my family. My father began to understand that his actions had consequences beyond just the immediate distribution of family resources. He started to see that breaking promises and lying about his intentions had damaged my trust in ways that couldn't be easily repaired. Over the following months, he made genuine efforts to understand my perspective and acknowledge the impact of his choices. He admitted that he'd taken my reliability and understanding for granted, assuming that I would always be willing to sacrifice my own interests for family harmony. He recognized that this assumption had been unfair and had prevented him from seeing my needs and feelings clearly. My mother took longer to understand the depth of the problem. She continued to insist that families require flexibility and compromise, that adult children shouldn't expect parents to honor every promise made during childhood. She struggled to see that the issue wasn't just about the car, but about a pattern of favoritism and deception that had shaped my entire experience within the family. But gradually, she began to acknowledge that Emma and I had been treated differently throughout our lives. She admitted that she'd been more protective of Emma's feelings and more willing to excuse Emma's mistakes. She recognized that she'd expected more resilience and understanding from me while offering Emma more support and sympathy. This acknowledgement was important, but it wasn't enough to restore the relationship to its previous closeness. Too much had been revealed about their priorities and their willingness to deceive me to protect Emma's interests. I could forgive the individual incidents, but I couldn't forget the systematic pattern they represented. I maintained a cordial but distant relationship with my parents, attending major family events but not participating in the day-to-day family drama and support systems. I was polite but not intimate, helpful when asked directly but not volunteering to solve problems or manage crises. I treated them with respect, but not with the automatic deference and accommodation that had characterized our relationship in the past. Emma and I eventually had a direct conversation about everything that had happened. She admitted that she'd known about the car decision in advance and had actively lobbied for it, but she claimed that she hadn't understood how much it would hurt me. She said she'd thought I was successful enough and secure enough that losing the car wouldn't really matter to me. This response revealed the fundamental misunderstanding that had shaped our relationship for years. Emma had never recognized that I had feelings that could be hurt or needs that could be ignored. She'd seen me as infinitely capable and resilient, someone who could handle disappointment and sacrifice without requiring the same level of consideration and support that she needed. I explained that my success and stability didn't make me immune to hurt or betrayal, that my ability to handle difficult situations didn't mean I should be expected to handle them alone, that my reliability didn't mean my feelings and needs were less important than hers. This conversation was enlightening for both of us, though it didn't lead to a closer relationship. We developed a respectful but limited connection based on honesty rather than pretense. We could interact politely at family events and exchange pleasantries about our lives, but we weren't close friends or confidants. The foundation of trust that could have supported a deeper relationship had been too thoroughly damaged by years of deception and favoritism. My professional life continued to flourish in ways that provided the recognition and respect I'd never received from my family. I was invited to join the board of directors for a major automotive museum, asked to consult on restoration projects for celebrity collectors, and featured in a documentary about women in the classic car industry. These achievements felt deeply meaningful because they were based on merit and expertise rather than family connections or inherited advantages. I was respected for my knowledge, my skills, and my contributions to the automotive community. The recognition was earned through my own efforts and validated by people who understood and valued my work. I also found a romantic relationship with someone who appreciated my passion for classic cars and understood the importance of honesty and reciprocity in relationships. He was a restoration specialist who owned his own shop, and we connected over our shared love of automotive craftsmanship and history. Our relationship was built on mutual respect and common interests rather than family obligation or emotional manipulation. Through this relationship, I experienced what it felt like to be valued for who I actually was, rather than for the role I played in someone else's life. I learned that healthy love doesn't require sacrifice of one's own needs and interests, that genuine partnership involves supporting each other's goals and dreams rather than expecting one person to consistently accommodate the other. The contrast with my family relationships was stark and enlightening. I realized that I'd been accepting conditional love and unequal treatment for so long that I'd forgotten what genuine care and consideration felt like. The difference helped me understand why I'd been willing to tolerate so much dysfunction in my family relationships. As I write this, it's been 3 years since the car incident, and my life has stabilized in ways I never expected. I'm financially secure, professionally successful, and personally fulfilled. I have a career that utilizes my skills and passions, a relationship that supports my growth and happiness, and a sense of self-worth that doesn't depend on other people's recognition or approval. My relationship with my family is cordial but boundaried. We exchange holiday greetings and attend major celebrations together, but I don't participate in the drama or the support systems that once defined my role in the family. I'm polite but not available, helpful when asked directly, but not volunteering to manage everyone else's problems. This distance has actually improved some aspects of our relationships. My parents have learned to appreciate the interactions we do have rather than taking my availability and support for granted. They've begun to see me as an independent person with my own life and priorities rather than as a reliable source of assistance for family problems. Emma has struggled more with the changes in our relationship. She's had to learn to manage her difficulties without my automatic support and advice. She's discovered that other family members and friends aren't as willing to provide the kind of unlimited assistance I'd offered for years. This has been a valuable learning experience for her, though a difficult one. The most important change has been in my own understanding of self-worth and healthy relationships. I've learned that love shouldn't require constant sacrifice of one's own needs, that family relationships should be based on mutual respect and consideration, that it's possible to maintain boundaries without losing the possibility of connection. I've also learned that success and recognition are more meaningful when they're earned independently rather than given conditionally. The achievements I've earned through my own efforts feel more substantial and lasting than any validation I might have received from my family would have felt. This experience has taught me that family dysfunction often persists because one person is willing to absorb the costs of maintaining harmony. When that person stops accepting unequal treatment, the whole system has to change. Some relationships improve through this process, while others reveal their fundamental incompatibility with healthy boundaries. If you're watching this and recognizing aspects of your own family dynamics, I want you to know that you deserve better than conditional love and unequal treatment. You deserve to have your contributions recognized, your promises honored, and your feelings considered. You deserve relationships that support your growth rather than requiring your diminishment. Setting boundaries with family members is one of the most difficult things you can do, but it's also one of the most important. Healthy relationships require honesty, reciprocity, and mutual respect. If someone in your life can't provide these things, it's okay to limit your exposure to their dysfunction while you build a support system that values and appreciates who you are. Your worth isn't determined by your family's recognition or approval. Your success doesn't obligate you to accept less consideration than others receive. Your ability to handle difficult situations doesn't mean you should be expected to handle them alone. You have the right to equal treatment, honest communication, and genuine care from the people who claim to love you. I'd love to hear from others who have navigated similar family dynamics. Have you experienced favoritism or broken promises in your family? How did you handle the discovery that your treatment was different from your siblings? What strategies helped you set boundaries while maintaining the relationships that were worth preserving? Please share your stories in the comments and remember to like this video if it resonated with your experience. Your engagement helps me know that these conversations are valuable and worth continuing. We're building a community of people who understand that family love should be unconditional, that promises should be honored, and that everyone deserves equal consideration and respect. Thank you for listening to my story, and remember that your worth isn't negotiable, your feelings matter, and you deserve relationships that celebrate who you are rather than requiring you to diminish yourself for someone else's comfort.